Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on financial management and accessing government funding. It's really great to have so many of you on the call today, and we're delighted to be hosting this webinar in partnership with the Charity Finance Group. Roberta, can you move me on to the next slide? Thank you. So my name's Josie Hinton. I'm Capacity Building Programmes Manager here at NCVO. I'm joined today by Roberta Fusco, Director of Policy and Engagement at CFG, and also by Gemma Royson-Jones, Head of Financial Resilience at the National Lottery Community Fund. So on the Friday, the 22nd of May, as I'm sure you're all aware, the National Lottery Community Fund opened their applications for the government's new Coronavirus Community Support Fund. So we know that this was a significant step for most charities, many of whom have seen an increase in demand for their services, coupled with a significant drop in income over a very short period. So in this context, we know that good financial planning and accessing funding will be essential. So with this in mind, I'm just going to go through quickly what we're going to be talking about today. So Roberta's going to kick us off with some top tips in terms of financial planning and where to go for support. We're then going to hear from Gemma, who will tell us a little bit more about the new Coronavirus Community Support Fund. Who is it for and what is expected from organisations in their application? And then we will have about 15 minutes at the end for questions. Just to say, before I hand over to Roberta, we are going to be recording this webinar, and the recording will be sent to you afterwards. Hopefully you will have all received the slides already, but the slides will be up on our NCVO KnowHow site afterwards as well. Over to you, Roberta.
Okay, thank you very much, and hello everybody. Really pleased to be invited to present alongside colleagues at NCVO and National Community Fund. I'm Roberta, as the slide says. I'm Director of Policy and Engagement at CFG. And some of you may know CFG, some of you might not. So here's a quick slide kind of summarising what we're all about. We're a membership organisation, we're an infrastructure body, and we have around 1,400 UK charities as members. Our membership does tend to be towards the larger end of the turnover scale, but we have lots of free resources as well for smaller organisations. And we work together closely with the other infrastructure bodies to support our sector. My job in this is, I'm not an accountant, I'm going to put that straight up. My job is to represent the needs of our sector to government and to kind of external policy makers and decision makers. But if you join our community, we have lots of special interest groups and an active finance community where you can share top tips, learn from each other, and you can see some of the testimonials there. So if you're interested, please do look us up. So a quick overview really of what we're doing in the policy space, how we're working together with other infrastructure organisations in the policy space to lobby government. So overarching everything that we're doing, especially given the announcements this weekend by the Chancellor. On Friday, we had the announcement that the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme is coming to a close, and I don't know whether any of you will have also seen in some of the papers, Sunday Times and I believe the Financial Times, we're also looking towards a potential fiscal event in July, which is not a budget, but it's where the Chancellor may set out some measures to help stimulate the economy. So overarching all of this, what we want to put forward is that the charity sector is essential to the nation's economic and social recovery. We're needed more than ever. What we'd like government to listen to and what we'd like to work with other infrastructure bodies to achieve is that we work to address the medium and long-term scale of financial challenge ahead. So while the 750 million that has been already committed, and we're going to hear a little bit about some of that from the National Lottery later, it's all very helpful and very needed. We also need to look ahead to the future. We need to ensure that the distribution of funding is speedy and efficient, and that's why I'm really pleased to be taking part in this webinar today with the National Lottery Fund to ensure that that allocation, that we're getting the messages out there that we need to get to, where they're getting to where they need to reach, and also making necessary changes to the existing schemes to make them fit for purpose. Now, some of those we've already had some success on, I'm glad to say. The main one, however, that the charity sector has been using is the job retention scheme. So we know, sorry, I've moved ahead too fast, but I'll leave that slide there anyway, just to give you a preview of what comes next. We know that around 70% of charities are using the coronavirus job retention scheme. So that's a huge amount. That's the most used. But before we move on, I would like to do a quick poll, if that's okay. And this is to kind of understand the nature of the organisations who have joined this call. So we'd like to understand your annual income, if that's okay, and that will help us then to tailor a little bit what comes next, tailor the information that comes next. So you have an option if you have an annual income of under 100,000, over 100,000 to up to a million to 10 million, and the final category above 10 million. The poll is open, so you can vote now or make your selections now. And I think there's a little bit of a delay before the results come in. So whilst they do, I'm just going to whittle on a little bit and talk about the support measures that government has introduced. I know my next slide will cover those as well. But we've also done a recent survey, again with NCVO and also with the Institute of Fundraising, and PwC are now analysing the results to see what the impact of the support measures have been on the charity sector and to quantify the level of need going forward. So some of you may have heard about our, or may have known that our asks ahead of the 750 million package. We calculated the loss to the sector in the first 3 months up to the end of May to be around 4.3 billion. And obviously the government very kindly has given us 750 million. Quite a big difference between those two figures. So the next step for us now is to try and calculate the loss and also the need coming over the year ahead. I think I need to do something to share the poll results. How do I do that?
It's fine, Roberta, we can see them.
You can see them, that's great, okie dokie. Do you need me to move on or?
No, I think that's fine. It shows a majority on this call are under 100,000 in terms of income, with about 40%. The next kind of largest group seem to be the 100K to a million. So the majority, 86% on this call, seem to be under a million income.
Okay. So that's really helpful for both Gemma and myself to know. So I'll move on now to the next bit. So I started talking a little bit about this already. So we have the 750 million package, but we also have a number of support measures. As I said, the most used of these has been the coronavirus job retention scheme, and on the survey that I just referenced, we're hoping to get some top lines on that out later this week, and that will give us a little bit more information about the use and the availability of the other schemes. Alongside the portion of funding that has gone to the National Lottery to distribute, there's also been 360 million via government departments. We've been keeping a tally on how much of that has been allocated and how much remains. As you can see from my slide, there's about 20 million that yet remains to be announced and allocated. So keep your eyes peeled. You never know if that might come towards be applicable to you as well, towards your sectors. One of the things that we've also been working on is ensuring that the funding that is allocated by government departments is also, as we said before, transparent and clear. And I think we've had some limited success in that area. So the best thing, if you want to find out a little bit more about that, is to go to the website that I've linked to, and there's a comprehensive list of the funding that's been allocated to date if you want to find out any more. So I'm going to move on now to the kind of top tips, helping top tips, and signpost you to hopefully what can be some helpful organisations or helpful advice and guidance for you. So before I kind of go into this, I've kind of overall, what would I say are the top tips for financial planning? So the easiest thing, it all boils down to however big or small your charity is to have a balance between the present and future. It's not just about your beneficiaries now, it's your beneficiaries in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. Obviously, the larger your annual income, the more able you are you're able to plan for the future and your future beneficiaries. Diversification obviously is another big angle. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. But as we've seen by this crisis, in a way, diversification has meant that all income streams have been affected. So it's not always the case that the more diverse your income streams, the safer you are. Normally that would apply, but we're in a situation, an unprecedented situation, where multiple income streams have been affected. At the base of all of it is knowing your cash flow. So again, that applies whatever the size of your organisation. Prepare a robust cash flow for a rolling 12-month period. That's kind of at the minimum. Manage your working capital. Ensure that you're managing your debtors and creditors promptly. And if you're towards the larger end of the scale of, we've said the organisations here between up to 1 million. Start to think about modelling different scenarios to your cash flow so that you understand your sensitivities and manage your risk appetite. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, and you all know those things. But if, in case any of that it might be helpful, or that you're looking for some templates or for some guidance, a couple of years ago, CFG ran a small charity scheme, and we have a website that's still available with lots of resources there. So you can see it's aimed at charities with less than 1 million turnover, so hopefully ideal for the audience for this webinar. And there you'll find templates and guidance on budgets, management accounts, cash flow, banking and accounting, and gift aid. We continue at CFG to get queries about gift aid and how to maximise gift aid from all sides of organisations. So it might be helpful to go and have a look there and recap some knowledge, even if you think you've got it all under control, as I'm sure you do. We also have a coronavirus guide on our website that brings together all the recent announcements that might be helpful for you to have a look at. NCVO also have a very helpful and full website called KnowHow. This covers more than just funding and income, but it has lots of information on funding and income as well, and lots of how-to guides. This is where you'd go for the kind of practical, how do I do this? What do I need to know? Is there a template for that? So have a look both at the KnowHow website and the CFG Small Charities website, and also NCVO's coronavirus guide there as well. Apart from kind of big national organisations like CFG and NCVO, you may also find lots of help and guidance and advice from your local networks. Now, some of these are paid for services, so may only start to apply to when your annual income can afford that. However, there's lots of information there that's also free, and also you may be able to look at their websites and find some other helpful guides and templates. So first port of call would be your local Centre for Voluntary Services. And if you look at NAVCA's website, NAVCA is the kind of national body, there's a searchable map for your nearest CVS. If you have a look at the CFG website, we have a list, again, a searchable map of community accountancy services. Again, these are located in your local areas, and their websites will often have loads of information. And don't forget the Association for Independent Examiners. Now, some of you may be subject, your organisation may be subject to independent examination, and up to 250,000 up to 1 million. So many of you may already be using AC or members of AC, but have a look there as well for some helpful guidance. That's all from me in terms of top tips and signposting. I hope that's been useful. And I'm very happy to hand over now to Gemma from the National Lottery Community Fund.
Thanks, Roberta. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Gemma, and I'm from the National Lottery Community Fund. Roberta, can you go forward a slide, please?
Of course.
Sorry, it's being a bit of a strange double-hander at this point. So Roberta is my right-hand person to secure the slide. So apologies if we keep going. you're going to hear me ask her to move forward quite a lot. So in the time that we've got, what I'm going to touch on is the purpose of this funding, which I think, as everyone understands, is to help support charities, to exist and to continue through the COVID-19 crisis, and to continue to support communities who are being most affected. I'll then touch on eligibility, a little bit about who in particular we're targeting and looking to support, and what is eligible in terms of the funding. But don't worry, everything I'm going to say is on our website, so please don't worry about rushing to write things down. And I'm sure most of you have been there already, and so are probably quite familiar with some of the information that I'm going to be going over. What I really want to kind of touch on is this last piece, is the information we'll be asked for, talking about the financial information we're going to be asking for, which builds on what Berta's been talking about in terms of financial planning and thinking about how you're being affected by COVID-19 and what exactly it is you need to keep going through this difficult period. It's also worth saying that we know that there's going to be high demand for COVID-19 funding. We know that the need in the sector is huge, and whilst it's fantastic that we have this funding available to support charities, it's not going to, it doesn't go as far as it isn't as much as we need it to be, which means that we anticipate we're only going to be able to support a proportion of applications. Now, this doesn't mean don't apply, but it does mean please make sure that you understand the areas that are being prioritised and how you best fit them. And so if you're not successful, please don't feel that's any reflection on the work that you do. As I say, there's going to be huge demand for this particular piece of funding. Can we move forward 2 slides, please, Roberta? So this, the purpose of the funding. So as you know, the government has announced £200 million in funding to support communities through COVID-19, the COVID Community Response Fund, which has been delivered through a grant by the National Lottery Community Fund. So what we have done is we've developed a joint response, which was distributing the government funding alongside National Lottery funding, which will support organisations to continue to deliver services to people and communities that are affected by COVID-19. And as I've just said, the funding won't enable us to fund everybody, but we believe we can still make a huge difference by getting this to those who need it most so they can respond to the pandemic. At this point, I think we'd like to do another poll. So Roberta, could you move forward a slide? We wanted to do a quick straw poll just to understand how many of you are already considering applying for funding from the Coronavirus Community Support Fund. So the options are, yes, I'm definitely planning to apply. I'm thinking I might apply, I'm unlikely to apply, or actually I have already applied. So if you could put your finger on your mouse on the relevant question, the relevant answer now, and then we'll see how many of you are already thinking about this. Aha. So 10% of you look like you've already applied. Fantastic. 42%, or probably about 83%, are planning to almost definitely or think you will apply, and 7% are unlikely to apply. What will be interesting to us is to understand what the correlation between the previous poll in terms of the size of the organisations, and whether that maps across from the smaller organisations, sub £1 million turnover, to the 80% of those of you who are looking to apply. That's great. That's really helpful to know. Thank you. So if we move forward after that, please. Eligibility. Who we can fund. So as I have said, we are expecting a high demand. So the funding isn't going to meet every charity's needs. But given the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 is having on some communities, we are prioritising our support to those people and communities that are most affected by the pandemic, as well as organisations that are led by people from those communities. So essentially, there are 3 priorities. The first one is organisations supporting people and communities who experience disproportionate challenge and difficulty as a result of COVID-19. So here we are looking particularly at organisations that are supporting older people, disabled people, including people with long-term health conditions, and Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities who are all facing specific challenges during the current crisis. We are also looking at supporting organisations who provide advice and support to those who are pushed into crisis and those supporting end-of-life care and their families. The second priority is for organisations who are supporting people in communities who will experience disproportionate challenge and difficulty as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. So this includes, for instance, organisations that are supporting people and families who face financial hardship as a result of the pandemic. It also includes organisations that are working to prevent domestic abuse and violence against protected groups, those working with homeless people, and those supporting vulnerable children and young people. Finally, we also know that there is increased demand for mental health support and support to mitigate the increased challenges of loneliness and isolation. And then the third priority is for organisations that are connecting communities and will support communities to work together to respond to COVID-19. Now this category includes organisations that are supporting local community activity, so for example volunteering or community organising. It also includes organisations supporting community and sector infrastructure, including public information. We know that there is increased demand for support with the development of digital data and technology capabilities. Finally, we want to support building capacity and infrastructure of Black, Asian and minority ethnic and other marginalised communities to ensure that they are in a better position after the national emergency response. So of these three categories, the government's funding will be used to fund organisations in the first two categories, and national lottery funding will be used to fund organisations in the last category. But as I think I have said, there is one process, so that there is no distinction in terms of a separate application process that you would go through. There's one process to an application to go through. So we try to streamline the experience as much as possible for you. Can we go forward a slide, please? So we obviously know that small and medium-sized charities are likely to be more vulnerable right now. So we really are encouraging applications from organisations like these. It doesn't matter if your organisation has not received funding from the community fund before, please do consider applying to us. And so we really are focusing on those we think to be particularly vulnerable at the moment. We also know that some communities, such as disabled people, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, are being very hard hit by the pandemic. So again, we really do encourage people to apply whose organisations are supporting those communities and those who are led by people from those communities. And if you are a group that's looking for government funding, because for potentially, for gambling reasons, you can't accept money from the National Lottery, please do tell us in your application, and we all acknowledge that. So beyond this response, National Lottery funding will still be available for longer term rebuild and recovery. If we could go forward a slide. So that's kind of who can apply and who we're targeting. In terms of what we can fund, there are two things that the fund is looking to fund. Firstly, the activities that are supporting people in communities affected by COVID-19. Which should be self-evident for what that means. And then secondly, it's to support organisations to overcome any acute financial difficulties that you're facing because of the pandemic. And so what we mean here is that organisations may well have seen drops in income as a result of the crisis. You might have been able to reduce your costs, but sometimes doing that in a short period of time is very difficult. We understand that. Or you might have seen that your costs have increased because you're having increased demand, or you have a sick workforce, you're trying to adapt to working very differently, and that has a cost attached to it. As a result, there may be situations where you no longer expect your future income is going to cover your future costs, and you might be predicting a cash flow problem. So whilst we are unable to fund retrospective costs, we are able to help make up for future funding gaps so that you can be confident in having the cash you need to meet costs as and when they fall due. So organisations can apply for anything from £300 and above, really, in terms of funding grant applications, which is to cover 6 months of costs. We're asking people to only apply for what they need and are expecting most grants to be under £100,000, although there is no cap. And this comes back to the fact that there is a large amount of need, and so we really are asking organisations to apply for what they need. You can only apply once. You can make one application for COVID-19 funding, so please do apply for what you need over that period of time. Organisations can apply either on their own or as part of a partnership. We will consider larger awards or longer timeframes, particularly for organisations that are working across more than one area of England, but these will be done on a case-by-case basis. And when you go through to our website, it should be clearly navigating you to whether you're applying for under 10,000, over 10,000, you know, the geographic area that you're looking at. So this leads us to our third poll. So we'd be interested to understand how many of you are thinking of applying for emergency funding, so to overcome acute financial difficulties, and how many of you are thinking about project funding to support COVID-related activities. Which makes me realise we probably should have had a third option here for people who want to apply who want and need both. But if you could make your voting now, that would be great. I feel like NCVO need to adapt a jingle. Right, okay, so roughly 2/3 of you are looking for project funding to support activities that will support communities through COVID-19, and about 1/3 of you are in need of funding to help you survive, essentially. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. In terms of what to expect, I think I've touched on this before. High demand, so please really do only ask for what do you need to support communities for up to 6 months, and we will bear with us as our funding teams respond. So we will assess applications that already received them, and the team are working and will work as quickly as possible because we understand the need for a quick decision and the need to have to get funding to you as soon as possible. But please bear with us as you recognise this is a high demand process. We are going to be monitoring demand closely, and we'll update you on any steps that we might need to take in the future to manage the number of applications so we can get money out to the communities as quickly as possible. So that's about eligibility. If I move on to talking about the application process, so there are really two aspects to this, which is firstly, tell us about your proposal. So I've already mentioned the areas of need that we're prioritising. So obviously we expect your projects to be about how your project or work makes a difference for these communities. So the typical questions, you know, you'll be used to responding to a funder is, what are you planning to do? What do you want to do? How will your work involve your community? How does your project fit with local activities? Who's going to benefit? How have they been affected by COVID-19? What difference is your project going to make? How is it going to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 for the particular community that you work with? And obviously, importantly, how much money do you need and how long do you need the money for? Again, please don't rush to write these down. These will be available on the website as you go through your application. And as far as possible, we're looking for organisations to be people-led, strengths-based and connected, which won't be a surprise to any of you that have received funding from the lottery before. So on the next slide, talks a bit about what that means in terms of people-led, strengths-based and connected. So these are things you might want to ask yourself, as you're putting forward your application. So we believe that people understand what's needed in their communities better than anyone. So it's really important that you involve your community in the design of the activities that you're planning. So how have you spoken to those people in your community? How do you know that what you're planning meets their needs? Have you listened to them? Have you used what they said in adapting your services to the current situation? And in terms of being strengths-based, we want to support people and communities to build on the knowledge, skills and experience they already have. So what's already working? How does your project, how will it add to what's already there? How will it complement the existing infrastructure and support that's out there? And finally, in terms of being connected, have you spoken to other groups in the area that are doing something similar to your project? Have you thought about actually how can you work together to help each other, to help the community more? So that's probably on the fundamentals around the project side. Around the financials, this is where if you've been supported by the lottery previously, we're asking for slightly different information than we previously have done. And what will happen is if you are if you are considered eligible for funding and you'll be invited to put forward a full application, you'll then receive questions about, tell us about your financial situation. Oh, sorry. So we understand, obviously, that your financial position may have changed a lot since COVID-19 began. And obviously, normally when people are applying for funders, you want to put yourself in the strongest possible position and light. Saying you've got some financial problems isn't normally kind of information people feel comfortable talking to their funders about. But obviously, don't worry, it's okay to tell us if you're struggling financially during this crisis. We understand that that's the case for a large number of organisations, which is exactly why this funding has been designed to support you through financial problems. So the information, we're only asking for this information so we can work out how best to support you. So I'd encourage you to be open with us. This isn't really about trying to portray yourself in the strongest light or necessarily most vulnerable light. It's just about being honest about this is where we are right now. So the type of questions and information we will be wanting to understand is really, what difference is COVID-19 making to your income and your spending? So how are your plans today different from where they were 3 months ago, and what does that future and the outlook look like for you now? Are you still expecting to be able to generate enough income to cover your costs? If yes, fantastic. If not, how much additional income do you think you'll need to cover the costs? Are you particularly worried right now that you might run out of cash? And if you do think that's going to happen, when's your best sense of you know, how close to crisis are you, and how much cash do you think you need, or unrestricted reserves do you have that you could draw on if needed? And if you have that information, how many months operating cost do you already have in your rainy day cash account or your unrestricted reserves account? So again, this is about helping us to understand, to paint a picture of where you are right now. We'll ask you for these questions, for which you can provide a written answer, but we'll also be going to provide you with a form, that a table in a Word document that you can download and then use that to submit your answer. So alongside this narrative to explain to tell the story about where you are right now, there'll be some tables which for you to put in some basic financial information, which will again help us to illustrate this financial position you're in and your financial need. So for this, you might find it helpful to work through this form with however it helps your organisation manage your finances. So that could be your financial manager, that could be a trustee, it could be your treasurer, it could be somebody else in your office team. It could also be that you don't have that information available yet right now because you haven't had the capacity or the time to go through it. So that's where the information that Roberta was talking about earlier, please do encourage you to look at the information they have available from the CFG, Small Charities Coalition, NCVO, Charities Commission, Small Charities Coalition, and the Charities Commission. They all have useful information about how do you think about the future planning, which will help you to work through actually what do we think is going to happen over the next few months. If you're requesting more than £50,000, then we will also ask you to submit an up-to-date cash flow forecast or budget. And again, that would be for the whole organisation. So if we move forward, the next few slides, what I'm going to go through is the form that we provide. So it is designed to be hopefully straightforward and simple. And again, this is just to give us a flavour of the pertinent information that we need just to really understand where you are now. So this, can you go forward another slide, please? Yeah, and this is where I'm going to be annoying because there's boxes that are going to come in. So thank you. So the first two columns on the left. So I've got some blue boxes here which are going to highlight some of the areas for you to complete during this form. Don't worry about writing this down again now. This is really for those who, just to make sure you kind of understand really what we're trying to get at with this. So there are 5 columns essentially in the form. If you work from the right hand side, this is the last one, is the column about the narrative to tell us what's changed. And then the first 2 columns are looking at your latest accounts. So that could be your annual accounts for December 2019. They might be for March 2019. They might be signed off and submitted to the Charity Commission, or equally they may be something that's still in draft form. And so please feel free to provide us with draft accounts if that is most appropriate for where you are. But in these boxes here at the top, just tell us what the dates are so we know what period they cover. And the next box, yes, and then we move on to the second set of two columns is looking at your plan for the year. So where we say 2020, that's essentially your current time period. That might be 2020-21, that might be for the next 6 months. Tell us what that period it is. Obviously different organisations will work over different timeframes. So this column is really telling us what were you planning to do this year or during this period before COVID-19 happened. And then if we move forward, this column, unsurprisingly, COVID-19 budget is actually now, this is what the picture looks like today. So this is really your revised picture. And so when we talked about thinking through the next few months and how your income and expenditure may have adapted and changed, this is the column to put in. This is what our current thinking is. So again, this helps to tell that story of what's changed and what has been the financial implications of the things changed that have taken place. Can we add the next one? So yeah, so as I said, the final column is for the narrative, and you may find actually you want to start here, because sometimes it can be much easier to start with writing down the explanation for how things have changed. So in words, what's the difference between the numbers, and then you can go back to filling in the numbers. It really depends on, for you, what's available. So what we've tried to do here in terms of the income categories is to simplify things. This isn't about detail. This is about giving us the big picture sense of how things have changed for the organisation. So grant income figure for the whole year in your accounts for the first 2 years, and then obviously for the period that are coming through. So that would include everything you're expecting to receive. Similarly, we've got donations, contracts, trading, and then other here to include anything that we've not described, particularly in those rows. And then the next one. So this column here, which for COVID-19 funding, which does not include your application for this particular funding, this is for anything you expect you might receive now through other COVID-19 response funding. So for example, this might be income you're receiving through the Job Retention Scheme, or it might be through other emergency funding that you've applied for from other funders and foundations that are available there. So this kind of will tell us what you're expecting to receive. And it's quite important that we'd like to understand what you're applying for. As I said, you can only apply once for the COVID-19 response funding from the lottery and government money. But obviously, I would be expecting you to be applying for COVID-19 support through multiple channels. But what you apply for and what you receive might not be the same thing. But please do tell us about what you're anticipating you're going to receive in response to COVID-19. So I think this one, that was the income, and then looking at expenditure. And again, you'll see here we've tried to simplify this so that it is not detail of your project budget, which if you're asking for project funding, we will still want a project budget to receive. This is about understanding the story of how your financial position has changed. So starting off with staffing costs. So there's anything for your existing staffing costs, except anything additional for COVID-19 projects. So the COVID-19 here would be on this fourth column. So if you're applying for project funding or something, there are additional costs that are happening as a result of COVID-19, please put them into this that box there. And then balance sheet. And again, this is in reference to your previous years. This is not a reference to where you are now, although obviously we have asked qualitative questions around your current cash and reserves position. So in terms of the balance sheet, could we have the next bubble, please? This is where the bubbles don't quite correlate to where they are, so apologies for that. There's a bit of shrinking a PowerPoint and not it failing. So current assets, put your bank balances here and the figures for any amount you're owed over the next 12 months. And similarly, current liabilities, let us know if you this is where you put anything you owed over the next 12 months, which might include loans. So I'd expect all this information to come from your annual accounts. So this shouldn't be something that you are needing to calculate specifically for this project, this application. It should be something that you can take your most recent accounts and then take the numbers from the balance sheet that's there. So then net current assets, that just tells us how much, you know, your current assets less your current liabilities, which again should be clearly marked on your balance sheet. The long-term liabilities here, this is the figure that reflects how much you owe after more than 12 months. So that might be a long-term loan that you have, or some kind of liability that will fall due after 12 months. And then restricted funds. So these are funds that have been given a strict purpose by the funder, and you know, you're very limited with what you can do. And so because this relates to your previous accounts, again, I'd expect this to be clearly marked in the accounts. And as we know, many funders have been very quick to respond to COVID-19 and reduced the restrictions that may be on funding. So one would hope that actually now you're in a much more positive position, that some of your restricted funding you're now able to use to meet your ongoing needs, and it can be more loosely considered unrestricted. And then the unrestricted funds, we go on to the next bubble. They're funds that you can use for any purpose than your charitable objects. Now, some organisations may have designated funds, so you may have within your unrestricted, you may have designated, actually we've got a VAT bill coming up, actually we've got a planned capital spend, actually we've already done some analysis to work out how much it would cost us to close down the organisation if it were to come to that, and therefore we've designated some of our unrestricted funds for that particular purpose. That's fine. Please tell us about that elsewhere, but this is just for that big bucket of unrestricted funds, which again should be in your annual accounts. So what I just finally say about the financial information, it's the two things. Firstly, it's the view from your most recent accounts. Again, so where I would hope that you can just take the report and you should be able to map the key figures into the table, and then looking at the budget for this year. What did the picture look like before COVID-19 happened, and what does the picture look like now? And again, this is about trying to understand how things have changed and what the financial implications for your organisation as a result. So if we go on to the next slide, next steps. So there are two easy ways to apply. Again, this will be on the website in terms of there is an online form for you to tell us about your funding, but actually you can send us an email, you can send us a video. There are other ways in which you can submit an application, initial application. All the information you need is on our website. That application form isn't there, which is why I particularly wanted to talk you through it, but it will be made available to you if you make an initial application and are considered eligible. So we go to the next slide. So this is questions. So I'd encourage, if you have technical questions or specific questions about the process, the application, expectations, etc., or go to our advice line. There's a telephone number here you can call, there's an email address, and there's also a link here which will take you to, there are different regional teams. So there are multiple ways in which you can communicate with the community fund to find out more. I suppose what the key points I really wanted to get across were that we know that small and medium-sized organisations are more vulnerable right now. We know that some communities, such as disabled people, people from Black and Asian minority ethnic communities, are being particularly badly hit by the pandemic. So we really do encourage organisations to apply that are supporting these communities or led by people in these communities. Please don't be put off by the fact that we might be asking you for financial information. Please don't be put off by the fact that you may not have had funding from us before. That's all fine. Please do. Please encourage you to get in touch. And finally, that we do know there's going to be high demand for the money, and we anticipate we can't support everybody. So again, if you're unsuccessful, please don't take this as a reflection on the work that you do. It's just a factor of the high volume of need that exists at the moment. And there, I think I'll end with 1 minute early. Success. I think we're then moving on to questions. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Gemma. So I think that's been a really helpful overview from you both, so thank you both very much. I'm now just going to field some of the kind of numerous questions that we've got in, we have received a lot of questions, and some of them are very specific to particular organisation's context. So I think for those ones where I feel that there's less sort of general applicability, I would suggest that you do contact the advice, you use the advice email and helpline that Gemma has highlighted, and we'll make that kind of clear in our follow-up email. But just to go into some more sort of general questions, I think the first kind of bit is directed at you, Gemma, which is maybe you can explain a little bit more about, in terms of the eligibility criteria, about the groups. A lot of organisations have questions about them providing support to particular groups of people. So, for example, unemployed young people, unemployed adults, the armed forces. Is there any kind of guidance around that about which particular groups you will or won't fund in that, groups of beneficiaries that you will or won't fund?
I think this comes down to how COVID-19 is affecting people, and so because this is all targeted around the supporting people who are affected greatly mostly by COVID-19. So I'd encourage you to think about how that manifests for the particular groups that you're working with. And again, this is something you can talk over with the advice team, so you can pick up the phone, speak to them and say, this is what we're currently doing, this is the need we're seeing, these are the people that we currently work with, and talk to them, and that's what I would encourage you to do.
Okay, that's helpful. And what about UK charities supporting vulnerable people in developing countries? Are they still eligible if their beneficiary group is outside of the UK?
So this is all about supporting people in England who are affected by COVID-19.
Okay. Any information, Gemma, on in terms of when people can expect to hear back?
I'm really sorry that no, there's not. I mean, as I say, the teams at the lottery are working very, very hard to try to process things as quickly as possible, but we can't give any guarantees or timescales available, unfortunately. But we will respond as quickly as we can.
Sure. Okay. I know you said a little, but you touched on this briefly, but can you just confirm, because we've had a few questions in about this, about people who've already applied or received or been refused funding from the lottery historically, are they still okay to apply for money again from this fund?
Right, so I think there are multiple answers to this question. So if you've got an existing application into the lottery, then it's going to depend on what programme you've applied for and where you are in your application journey. And so if you've already got an application in, then you should expect we will contact you if there's going to be any change. So that's where, or if you're already in the process. If you've applied historically and been rejected, that's fine, you can still apply. You know, please do consider applying. That shouldn't be a barrier to future applications. But you can only apply once for emergency COVID-19 funding. So you should only put one application in now, not multiple, but equally to keep in mind that over the next 6 months your needs may change. So back to looking at applying for what you think you're going to need over that time period. And recognising that because there's only limited funding available, we really are asking you to apply for what you need.
Okay, thank you. Roberta, one for you, just to give Gemma a bit of a break. So please, can we have your thoughts on the implications for the charity sector of the stricter going concern obligations on auditors and examiners, whether you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I've been talking to some larger charities who are, going through audit at the moment, and there do seem to be some, let's say, differences in approach. Some auditors are taking quite a strict view towards how to report, how to audit, and passing on some of that concern onto charity. So we are waiting for some advice from the Charity Commission actually around serious incident reporting. Now that should also help to throw more light onto the going concern reporting requirements from auditors. So for those perhaps who don't know some of the background, and I may not be explaining this perfectly, but I'll do my best. Auditors are now asked to kind of there's a stricter compliance regime essentially for auditors to report on going concern. Now we expect, CFG expect that, you know, since the situation that we're all in, it would almost be the exception for an auditor not to report on a going, not to highlight some matters of material significance, because we've seen such a massive reduction in income. What I can say as well is that the FRC have issued a guidance note to auditors to say that during COVID-19, there's no higher requirement on charities to have to provide a higher level of evidence. Nevertheless, the onus on auditors and charities and trustees is to report accurately. So we shouldn't be seeing any kind of special treatment because of COVID-19, other than making some what's the word, concessions to the fact that, well, because we're in lockdown, we can't go and do stock takes, so we'll have to think of a different way of auditing that. But we're hopeful that the audit profession are working with charities to be as helpful as possible. Where there are instances perhaps where there's been a higher level of higher requests for information, it's a tricky one, because we're all kind of working in the dark, and but I think we're all doing our best. I urge you, if you do have any particular concerns, to either get in touch with us or to discuss further with your auditor if you are having some difficulties. But in terms of what we expect to see from annual reports going forward, it's very likely that there will be lots of issues that are raised, lots of queries on the accounts, because none of us can plan. We're not in a situation where we can confidently plan for the future, and where there will be question marks raised. The next thing to look out for will be from that advice from the Charity Commission on reporting a serious incident. Now, current guidance, which hasn't been updated yet, is that you need to report a serious incident if there is a sudden drop of 20% in income. Obviously, that might be the case for the majority of charities. So we're waiting to see what the Charity Commission will come out with in their updated guidance.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Gemma, back to you. There's a question here just about the sort of what portion of the government funding is going to different parts of the UK, or whether you have any sort of ideas around that in terms of the geography of the distribution.
That's a very good question, to which I don't know the specific answer. I mean, I think that we are very mindful, and we are keeping a track of where funding applications are coming in, where the need is, and where things are being received. And so let me get back to you with the specific. I will check that question.
No problem. I think if there are questions that we can't address here, we will aim to send something out to those who've registered with a kind of follow-up answer. So we will try and answer some of these that we can't address now. Gemma, another one for you, I'm afraid. So you mentioned an increased demand for digital data, and there's quite an interesting question here about is this something you would consider funding as a project? So the example given was funding an organisation to form a medium large-scale survey to understand how tech has impacted isolated people's COVID-19 experience. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's the one I need to get back to you. I say that because we have a separate part of the organisation that looks at digital, that looks specifically at digital, and is looking at kind of a different sphere of work. Let me come back to you on that.
Okay. I think the other one that, Gemma, you might have an answer to here is around kind of funding of CICs and social enterprises and sort of trusts, so ones that don't necessarily have charitable status. Can you confirm whether those entities are eligible for funding?
Sure. So if you look on the website when you're thinking of applying and who can apply section, there is a quite detailed definition of what we can and can't fund. So we can fund organisations that are not charities, where there's a clear social mission, asset locked, etc. So I'd encourage organisation KICs can absolutely be funded, that's fine. I'd encourage you to look there and then look at how does your legal structure fit that criteria.
Cool, thank you. I think we've got time for one or two more. So one for Roberta. So the government are expecting many bad debts from the bounce back loan scheme, and just a question about what this might mean for the charity sector.
Yeah, so on the civils and the bounce back loans and so on, as I was saying earlier, one of the things we wanted and we still want from government is amendments to schemes to make them fit for purpose for the charity sector. One of the small wins that we did get was to remove the previous restriction, so that there was a restriction of around 50% trading for the loans. That's now removed, so that means that more charitables in theory are eligible. But what we found from our research is that of the charities who were applying, the majority are still being rejected for those loans anyway, whether that's the civils or the bounce back loans. Talking to some banks the other week, their opinion, that their assessment was that actually that wasn't borne out in their monitoring of loans that they were sending out. But I think there might be some discrepancy there in size of organisation applying for loans. Obviously, the bigger your organisation, the greater your annual turnover, the more likely perhaps you are to be able to plan for future, having larger, potentially having more reserves or having more income to play around with. But what our research has shown, and what you'll see coming out in the next week, is that loans aren't one of the biggest areas that charities are accessing or even able to access. In terms of the government expecting bad debt from them, the way they've been set up is that debt is then resting with the banks. And what we know is that the first 12 months is interest-free. Following that 12 months, the banks are able to set varying levels of interest. And I think that's why we're seeing the majority of charity applications being rejected, because of that concern over bad debt going forward. So in terms of how it might affect the charity sector, I think it already is, at least from what we're seeing from our survey results. That's not empirical. We haven't asked why have these been rejected, but I would suspect that that's one of the reasons. Does that help to answer, do you think?
Yeah,
Josie?
I do. I think that's helpful. In we've got 2 more minutes. I think I'm just going to give one final question to Gemma, which is interesting, about what checks you're doing in terms of kind of checking for fraudulent applications, and whether it's worth you kind of publicising this in order to deter people. I don't know if you already do, but we know that, yeah, fraud is something that a lot of organisations are being told to be aware of.
Interesting question, good question. So we undertake all the same controls that we would do for any application to come to us. So there is no difference in terms of fraudulent applications. So we typically would look at, we do authenticity checks of the organisation, we do authenticity checks of the individuals, There's a reason why we ask for bank statements from organisations. There's a reason why we ask for information for the appointed persons for the organisation. So we would do standard checks, the checks that go through. So there's no change to how we would be looking at that.
Brilliant, thank you. It's now 3 o'clock, so I'm very aware that people have other things to be getting on with in this very busy time. So thank you both very much for taking all those questions. And I suppose just to wrap up, to say that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending out the recording and the slides, and we will certainly have a look through these questions and get back to you on any ones that we didn't feel we were sort of able to answer on this webinar. But as I say, we would recommend that you contact with very specific inquiries the advice line of the National Lottery Community Fund and the details that Gemma gave earlier. But that's all from us. So thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you on another of our webinars very soon. Thank you.